Part 1.
You will hear some students discussing an assignment about zoos. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello, Brenda. How are you doing?
Fine. I've just come over to talk about this assignment on the function of zoos. Oh, hello, Charles.
Hello, Brenda. That's good. I've just been in the library looking at some stuff. I think Adrian's been on the web.
Yes, I have.
Well, that's great. What have you found out about zoos?
I've been looking into the history both of zoos and of keeping animals generally.
I didn't think we had to do that.
Yes, it was one of the topics we had to research. We definitely need to cover it, even if only briefly, I think. After all, people have kept animals for recreation and pleasure for centuries. The ancient Egyptians kept collections of animals, and of course the Romans kept animals for recreation.
Ah, the Romans. That brings us to the general question of the treatment of animals and the mistreatment of them.
Yes, but that's not our topic. We've been told to keep off that. Now, where were we?
Our assignment is concerned with the purposes of zoos in general and in our modern era. We have to cover the history, but not in great depth. Our main focus is the scientific aspects of zoos and the work they do for conservation and so on.
We mustn't forget the question of who pays for them. Zoos are hugely expensive places to run nowadays. There are the costs of feeding the animals, obviously, and security for the animals and the public. What happens if they escaped and so on? We have to ask what benefits we get from this.
Adrian, I don't think you'll find we have to do that kind of thing at all.
But I've been looking into all that and the social benefits of zoos.
What I mean is, that's not part of this assignment. All this financial and safety stuff is not necessary. We should stick to their purposes. Now, what have you found out, Charles?
Well, I discovered that the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums was very helpful on this. I've got their website address here somewhere. I found out about the scientific research that zoos do. The other thing we should cover is the educational side of their work.
The educational side is pretty obvious. I've got lots of stuff here about this and more references to websites and information. There's also the area of entertainment. What about that?
He's got a point. I think we need to do some more research on that.
Fine, but it sounds like we've covered the history and science angles pretty well.
I agree. Let's leave those for now and plan some more study on the entertainment stuff.
And let's do some more work on the conservation element.
Now you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10.
Now answer questions 6 to 10.
Oh yes, the Arabian oryx is a classic case.
The what?
The Arabian oryx. It's like a deer, but white. That is, it has a white body, but brown legs, and long curved horns. It normally lives in the hot desert in the Arabian Peninsula. Anyway, in the 70s, the population declined, and in 1972, the last wild oryx was shot and it became extinct in the wild. There were a few left in zoos in the United States where there was a captive breeding program. This was so successful that in 1982, a small population was reintroduced into the wild. Hunting of wild animals was made illegal, and there are now about 300 in Oman.
Although there was a big problem there, I believe. The population went up to about 450 in the 90s, and then illegal hunting did take place. The population crashed again, and the programs had to be restarted. But that's been successful, and there are now, I believe, as you say, several hundred in the wild. This is all available on the websites that Adrian has noted.
There was a similar program in Saudi Arabia, and I think there are hundreds in the desert there now.
We can use that as a definite success story.
And what have you found out?
Yes, what have you come up with?
I'm going to the library now.
Good.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. You'll hear a lecturer talking to students about a printing process. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
As I've made clear in earlier lectures, many different solutions have been proposed to the basic technological problem of getting meaningful marks onto paper. In other words, several different forms of printing have developed over the years, many of which are still in use today for different purposes. This week, I'd like to discuss the rotogravure process. This is one of the most widely used printing processes, and after describing how the process works, I'll be describing some of its industrial uses and the advantages and disadvantages of this form of printing. As the name implies, rotogravure is a form of printing in which large cylindrical pieces of metal rotate, while the paper to be printed passes between them. The paper is held in place against the printing surface by the impression roller. The weight of this roller is one of the factors that affect how much ink is actually transferred to the paper. Remember that this roller does not directly transfer ink onto the paper. The side in contact with the impression roller remains blank, and it's the other side of the paper which is actually the printed side. The impression roller presses the paper against the ink-bearing roller, generally known as the gravure cylinder. This roller is etched or engraved using either a laser or a diamond-tipped etching machine. This creates a large number of tiny holes in the surface of the roller which hold the ink. The depth and size of these holes determines how much ink is picked up from the ink fountain, which the whole printing assembly rests in. How much ink is picked up, in turn, determines the density of the image produced. As it rotates, the lower roller picks up more ink on its surface than is required, and this needs to be removed before contact with the paper. A flat edge, called the doctor blade, scrapes against the surface and removes all ink which is not in one of the holes on the surface of the lower roller. This should lead to a clean image.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now that we understand a little of the mechanics of rotogravure printing, I'd like to look at it in the wider context of the printing industry and discuss the main uses. One of the main advantages of the rotogravure process is that the amount of ink which can be transferred to the paper is high compared to other printing methods. This means that a broad density range can be produced. In other words, with rotogravure, it's possible to produce many different light and dark shades, making it particularly suitable for reproducing photographs and fine art. For shorter print runs, some other processes may give a finer image, but rotogravure is ideal for jobs that involve printing, for example, 1 million magazines. One common place where you'll see printed matter that has been produced by rotogravure is in the advertising material that is often inserted into Sunday newspapers. Of course, it's not just paper that can be printed by rotogravure. It's a very flexible process, since the rollers used can be made to any size required. Whether it's consumer packaging or large rolls of floor covering that need to be printed, rotogravure is a relatively cheap, quick method that is used in a variety of industries. This isn't to say that rotogravure is without its disadvantages. Probably the main drawback is the fact that, with large areas of colour, the dots are visible, even without using any kind of magnifying aid. Now, does anyone have any questions about the rotogravure process?
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear some students talking about an arts assignment.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
What have you been working on, Arthur?
I've been looking into the funding of the arts by the Arts Association.
Oh, Mr. Simpson gave you that topic, did he?
Yes, it's not too difficult. At least all the facts and figures are easy to find, or I think they will be. I've done a lot of useful stuff already. Simpson hasn't asked me to present my research for the past few seminars, so I think he might ask me this time.
Well, what have you found out?
Well, it's big money at the Arts Association. £330 million from the government and £118 million from the lottery. Let me see, I've got my notes here. Now, the Arts Association mission statement tells us that it exists to develop, sustain and promote the arts. So that's clear. But then we need to know exactly how it can do this. However, before we get to that, there are certain issues which the association must take into account.
What are those issues?
They are, first, access. This is the idea that the arts mustn't be just for the few.
Not just Italian opera, but pop concerts too.
Something like that. Other issues are education, cultural diversity, social regeneration and social inclusion. All these are different ways of saying that the arts are for everyone.
All right, but what does it actually do?
It does what it wants, I think. The government does not interfere in its activities, but demands that it gets value for money for its funds.
But there must be certain programmes that it carries out.
Oh, yes. There is the touring programme, which is what it says. That is, a programme to support...
Give money to?
Yes, that's right. To support touring companies, for example, dance companies, orchestras and so on. There is also the recovery programme.
What on earth is that?
It's a financial programme to give extra money to organisations which are financially in a bad way, or which might have financial difficulties in the future. Like it says, it's for their recovery.
It all seems very complicated.
It is.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Did you get any information on the reading for the other half of our work?
Yes, I did. You mean the Art and Society module?
Yes.
Yes. I met Simpson himself as we were waiting for a train at Norchester Station, so I managed to ask him.
Any luck?
Yes, I've got the notes I took here.
Oh.
He told me, of course, to start with Greenberg, who covers contemporary art and the up-to-the-minute movements in America. It's about the modern movements, really. As far as the economic impact of art is concerned, a basic text is the Parliamentary Report on Art and the UK Economy. This gives lots of monetary facts and figures, but the figures are not very satisfactory, as, of course, a lot of the information is confidential and can't be published. Art Now, Art Wow by someone called Dennison sounds exciting, and is about how art and artists are created, presented for buyers, and sold in the US. It's about the whole trade in art as a phenomenon.
Like a product? Like washing powder?
Yes, that's the idea of the book, anyway. And there's another one here. Oh, yes, by someone called Hampton. It's a book called American Art, which Simpson says is full of discussion on the relationship of art to the other aspects of culture, such as film, television, books, and so on.
Popular culture, I suppose.
Not just popular. Culture of all sorts, I imagine. Finally, for the spiritual and more abstract aspects of art, he recommends Art and the Mind of Modern Man by Frick. It's sort of about how art relates to how we think. He did have lots of other recommendations, but luckily his train arrived before he could move on to them. These seem enough to me.
Yes, they're a good place to start. We will be busy.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. Listen to an interview. Mr. Brooks, Mark, Jean and Robert are being interviewed on the subject of friendship.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I consider friendship to be one of the most important things in life, whatever your status, married or single. I see too many lonely people around. A lot of us get so involved with material values, family problems, keeping up with the Joneses, etc., that we forget the real meaning of friendship.
Which is what, according to you?
They say a friend in need is a friend indeed, which is partly true. But a real friend should also be able to share your happy moments without feeling jealous. A good friendship is one where you can accept and forgive him, understand mood, and don't feel hurt if a friend doesn't feel like seeing you. Of course, honesty is an essential part of any relationship. We should learn to accept our friends for what they are.
As a married man, do you find your friendship is only with other men?
Of course not. Both my wife and I have men and women friends, thank goodness. Although family life is fulfilling, it isn't enough. Both my wife and I get tremendous satisfaction from our friends, married or single, male and female. And we both have our separate friends too. We'd get bored with each other if we had the same friends.
You must have a full life.
We certainly do. And as I say, our friendship gives us a lot of pleasure. After all, friends should not be people with whom you kill time. Real friendship, in my opinion, is a spiritually developing experience.
I've never had a lot of friends. I've never regarded them as particularly important. Perhaps that's because I come from a big family, 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and lots of cousins. And that's what's really important in my family. If you really need help, you get it from your family, don't you? Well, at least that's what I've always found.
What about you, Jean?
To me, friendship, having friends, people I know I can really count on. To me, that's the most important thing in life. It's more important even than love. If you love someone, you can always fall out of love again, and that can lead to a lot of hurt feelings, bitterness and so on. But a good friend is a friend for life.
And what exactly do you mean by a friend?
Well, I've already said, someone you know you can count on. I suppose what I really mean is, let's see, how am I going to put this? It's someone who will help you if you need help, who will listen to you when you talk about your problems, someone you can trust.
What do you mean by a friend, Robert?
Who likes the same things that you do. Who you can argue with and not lose your temper, even if you don't always agree about things. I mean, someone who you don't have to talk to all the time, but can be silent with, perhaps. That's important, too. You can just sit together and not say very much sometimes. Just relax. I don't like people who talk all the time.
Are you very good at keeping in touch with your friends if you don't see them regularly?
No, not always. I've lived in lots of places, and, to be honest, once I move away, I often do drift out of touch with my friends. And I'm not a very good letter writer either. Never have been. But I know that if I saw those friends again, if I ever moved back to the same place, or for some other reasons we got back into close contact again, I'm sure the friendship would be just as strong as it was before.
7 of my friends have moved away, got married, things like that. One of my friends has had a baby recently, and I'll admit, I don't see or hear from her as much as I used to. She lives in another neighbourhood, and when I phone her, she always seems busy. But that's an exception. I write a lot of letters to my friends, and get a lot of letters from them. I have a friend I went to school with, and 10 years ago she emigrated to Canada. But she still writes to me every month, and I write to her just as often.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.